An elderly woman named Lisey lived in a nursing home in the suburbs of Valencia. Today is her 90th birthday, and a small celebration was organized in her honor. The caregivers baked a cake, set the table, and gathered all the elderly residents for the celebration. Lisey was especially sad that day, and her regular caregiver, a young girl with blonde hair and blue eyes named Maria, noticed it. Maria was worried about Lisey's condition. Looking at the old woman in the twilight of her life, she couldn't help but think that someday she would grow old, too. These thoughts made her wistful. She took care of Lisey as she would want someone to take care of her in her old age. As evening came, the caregivers gradually brought out the elderly residents and seated them at the table. Some of them were still sane, but most of them were miserable, abandoned because of their illnesses and psychological disorders. They didn't even understand where they were. The atmosphere at this celebration was much more dismal than at a funeral. It was painful for Mary to watch, and she even almost cried a couple of times. When everything was ready, Lisey expressed her desire to speak. "We are all here for a reason. Throughout our lives, we've made mistakes and didn't appreciate those who truly loved us, and that's why we're here. And if it weren't for these young angels who care for us like their own parents, we would have perished a long time ago." Everyone was silent except for an old man named Ludovic who screamed strangely, sounding like a dying animal. Ludovic was born with cerebral palsy, and these sounds were the only things he could utter. Lisey paused and continued, "I want to warn these young ladies by telling them about the biggest mistake I've made in my life. And no matter how strange my story may seem, please be patient and listen to me until the end." Lisey was born in Barcelona in 1930. Her father was a professor of philology and often traveled the world, and her mother was an opera singer who also frequently worked away from home. Since her parents couldn't afford to stay at home, a nanny took care of Lisey since birth. Lisey had few friends and no girlfriends at school. She was an outcast. Besides, her appearance was specific. A small, receded chin, a large, eagle-like nose, and uneven teeth made her somewhat repulsive. The girl never went to parties or even walked down the street because she was ashamed of her appearance. She always stayed home, did her homework, and read romances with happy endings. Lisey had a weak character since childhood. She was always giving in, letting classmates copy her homework, and even frequently giving away her personal belongings. She thought she could win people's affection and friendship that way. But people, unfortunately, only used her, took away, and never gave anything in return, except ingratitude. Peers constantly bullied her, finding it amusing to lock her in the bathroom, take away her pens, and put glue on her chair in class. Lisey, because to her weakness, couldn't stand up to anyone, and the teachers didn't give these things much importance. The girl was incredibly lonely. Her classmates only talked to her because they could copy her homework, and the guys didn't pay any attention to her at all. Years went by. School and university were left behind. Lisey was educated in design. She was great at drawing since childhood and got a job in one of the fashion stores that produced its own clothing line. Lisey's responsibilities included developing designs for a line of women's underwear. The team she joined consisted mostly of women between the ages of 27 and 35, and they were all enemies of each other. The ladies' morning started with gossip, picking apart each colleague, discussing her personal life, perfume, clothes, and of course, everything related to love affairs. Lisey's boss was named Margot. She was a middle-aged woman with unsurpassed taste, aristocratic manners, and a sharp sense of everything related to fashion. Margot hired Lisey because of her drawing talent, and somewhere deep down she was curious about how such a shy and silent person would get along with all those flashy beasts who constantly competed with each other in flattery and sycophancy for the right to a pay raise. Lisey wasn't good at flattering or pretending, but what she was really good at was drawing. She had a precise idea of what women's underwear should look like. Lisey would even sit up at night sketching future designs in her small room on the outskirts of Barcelona. She didn't want to live with her parents, whom she barely knew. She showed all her sketches to her boss, Margot, who chose the ones she liked the most and put them into production. The boss noticed how responsible Lisey was with her work. However, the other girls in the workplace began to envy her. Lisey always dressed modestly and didn't wear designer clothes or put on a lot of makeup. During lunchtime, all the girls from the store would gather in small groups to a nearby cafe. There they were constantly talking about Lisey's quirks, her unattractive appearance, and expressed their disapproval of how she even ended up in their team. Everyone at work, except Margot, treated Lisey with contempt. No one was shy about using hurtful words. Often Lisey would walk past the water cooler and overhear them calling her ugly and unworthy. Of course, it was all done intentionally. What bothered her the most were the three girls who were the alpha females in their group. Isabel, Karma, and Irene were considered the most fashionable, and everyone looked up to them. These three had more than one admirer, and every evening, well-dressed men would come to pick them up from work, bringing them flowers and expensive trinkets. Lisey often sat up at night in her room and wondered why people treated her so badly. After all, she helped everyone and never hurt anyone. Most of the time she felt sad and dreamed of living a normal life, going on dates, looking good, and feeling wanted. She was already 27 years old, and in all that time, she had not had a single admirer. One day she met Margot at the entrance of the store. She ran up to Lisey with a smile on her face, hugged her tightly, and said, "We did it!" Lisey's design had become very popular in the market, and as a result, the store's profits had multiplied. She sat with Margot for 3 hours, discussing upcoming projects and events. When Lisey left her office, her colleagues greeted her with contemptuous glances. She got promoted 6 months after starting the job. But it didn't bring her much joy because now everyone hated her even more. Unexpectedly, Lily, Isabel, Karma, and Irene invited her for a cup of coffee at the same cafe where the store employees used to go. Lisey was surprised by their invitation. She thought that finally her colleagues had accepted her, and she would have friends. When she walked into the cafe, Lily, Isabel, and Karma were already waiting for her at the table. The cafe was crowded with people, but for some reason it was quiet. Lisey approached the table, greeted them quietly, and was about to sit down. But Isabel stopped her with a gesture and pointed to the trash can. Lisey was stunned. Isabel hissed like a snake. "This is a place for decent ladies. For an ugly monster like you, we have a place next to the trash can." Lisey was petrified with horror. Everyone sitting nearby looked at her, and their eyes were full of mockery. Isabel continued, "Do you think you're better than everyone else? What merit did Margot see in you to give you a promotion? Designing cheap women's panties. Do you wear panties yourself? Or do you wear panties yourself? Or do you walk around in old women's pants?" Lisey ran out of the cafe in horror and didn't even go back to work. She ran until she couldn't run anymore, and by then it was already starting to get dark. As she walked home after this nightmare, she felt overwhelmed with anger and helplessness. Suddenly, passing by some buildings, she saw a sign that said a healer lived in the house and could heal souls. Lisey smirked to herself and intended to keep walking, but something made her stop for a moment. In that moment, she felt so desperate that she would have turned to any charlatan and believed any lie that would calm her down even a little bit. The sign led to a basement of a 3-story building. Lisey barely squeezed through the narrow corridor that led to an open wooden door, from which a reddish light was visible. She found herself in a small room that reeked of dirty socks. Lisey remembered the smell very distinctly. In front of her was a woman whose face Lisey couldn't remember, no matter how hard she tried. Something stupefying and hypnotic hung in the air. Candles burned everywhere, and there were signs with strange symbols hanging on the walls. The witch greeted the guest with a gesture and offered her a seat. Then she began muttering to herself, drank something from a bowl, and turned to Lisey, saying, "In our time, it's rare to meet an innocent woman who has preserved her chastity for so long. I see that you're lost. You've always been lost, and you don't know yourself. Nobody knows you. A little child is sitting somewhere deep in your soul and crying incessantly. You have no family, no friends, no companions. But you have enemies. The whole world is against you." Lisey listened silently, and the witch continued, "One of my servants, whom you call a spirit, wants to help you. He's standing here next to me and ready to take care of you. He will punish your enemies and bring everything you desire into your life. But keep in mind, in exchange for his gifts, he will take something from you. It can be anything. He only needs your consent. Think for a minute, but don't make him wait too long." Lisey didn't take the witch's word seriously, but something made her doubt. After a minute, she decided that she had nothing to lose and agreed. A young girl couldn't remember how she got out of that basement and how she made it back home. Everything that happened that evening seemed like a dream, which she soon forgot about. A week later, on her way to work, Lisey saw an advertisement for a plastic surgery group with a famous surgeon who had come from Germany to Barcelona. It was the first time in her life that Lisey had thought about changing her appearance, and the idea stuck in her head. However, she didn't have the money, as plastic surgery costs a lot, which she wouldn't earn even in years. That's what she thought. At the shop, Margot greeted her and invited her to her office. She told Lisey about the famous surgeon who had done her surgery 3 years ago. Margot knew how Lisey was self-conscious about her appearance and wanted to give her a gift. She had already made an appointment with the doctor, and Lisey was scheduled to see him next week. Lisey was over the moon with happiness and hugged Margot in tears. A month passed since the plastic surgery. Lisey had been sitting at home all this time because rehabilitation was necessary after the operation. It must be admitted that the surgeon lived up to his name. Lisey's sunken jaw and hooked nose had been corrected. Now she enjoyed looking at herself in the mirror. She bought herself a dress, put on makeup, and went to work. As soon as she stepped through the door, she learned that Isabel had been hit by a car 3 days ago. All the employees were going to visit the family to express condolences. At the funeral, Lisey remembered her visit to the witch and wanted to connect Isabel's death with that event, but the thought quickly disappeared from her mind. Just a coincidence, that's all. Soon, the girl's life changed beyond recognition. She finally got a suitor named Andre, with whom she experienced the joys of love and relationships. Margaret appointed Lisey as her assistant, and they started attending fashion shows together. By the age of 30, the once introverted, shy, and unsure girl had transformed into a true socialite. By this time, the fate of her tormentors had already taken a tragic turn. Karma, one of the 3 beasts, soon fell ill. She left her job and, as rumors say, parted ways with her husband. Irene, on the other hand, loved to indulge in alcohol and spend time in nightclubs. After one such night out, she got behind the wheel while intoxicated and fatally hit a person, which landed her in jail for 4 years. One night, Lisey had a dream. In her dream, she met the same witch she went to after the incident at the cafe with Isabel, Karma, and Irene. She seemed to have gone back to the same basement, but this time, there was a man in the room with the witch. Lisey somehow felt that this man was the same spirit that had been helping her all this time. The witch told Lisey that she had received all the desired blessings of this world, and now the spirit, who had been helping her all this time, would take away everything she wished for, as agreed upon. Lisey woke up in horror, feeling like she had turned back into that defenseless and lonely girl she was before. From that evening onwards, The spirit did nothing but take away everything valuable that Lisey had. At first, he took her son, who was already incurably ill. Literally half a year later, Lisey's mother and father died in a shipwreck. She and her young husband, who was the only man in her life, parted ways because they couldn't cope with the loss of their child. Lisey searched for the place where she met the witch many times, but she could never find it. Whoever she asked, they only laughed at her, thinking she was crazy. Years and decades went by. At the end of her days, Lisey found herself in a nursing home because she had nowhere else to go. Now she sat at the table and told her story to other old and frail men and women, just like her. The nurses listened in shock as she finished her story with these words. No matter how difficult your life may be, don't seek help from fortune tellers and witches. Trust only in the Lord. People are evil. The world itself is filled with malice. But don't let this filth penetrate you. Otherwise you will suffer the same fate as me.